Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Austin and I are going to talk a little bit more, just expanding upon what we kind of discussed in the last episode with the American Empire and everything like that. So I really did kind of want to throw it to you first, Austin. What is your view? I guess now people are saying we're kind of in the Empire stage, right? We've kind of Tucker Carlson saying we left the Republic. We're now kind of more in the Empire. What's kind of your view on kind of the American empire, quote unquote, and what's kind of your perspective on us using power now that we are kind of viewing ourselves as the empire?
It's I'm not for me personally, I'm not favorable because historic like I don't agree with Tucker that we're just now doing this. I feel like it's in the past we've been smart enough to kind of mask it, but
Yep.
now it's kind of like the new administration's just obviously just like, oh, we're just going in for the oil and we're this or that, and it's just like, yeah, that sounds cool to like a certain part of like the base, but to like everybody else around the world, it doesn't, and that just kind of provokes issues in of itself.
Yep.
And I mean, yeah, like we talked about in the last episode, they're kind of on a winning streak right now. They've so far, nothing's at least foreign policy wise has directly blown up in their faces. But it's like once you start putting yourself in these situations where you're being, the whole reason the U.S. set up the international order as it exists was to benefit it and to kind of give it, I would guess you call it like a moralizing framework because it's like when you're blatantly in your own self-interest, it gets a lot harder to justify anything you do to like other people. So that's why the U.S. was, and that's not saying that the previous existing system didn't favor us, like I said, but it's just you're smart enough to give yourself that political cover, like, oh, we're not doing this because it benefits us. We're doing this because it benefits you, democracy and all that good stuff. And it's like it's not necessarily that we haven't been the empire. It's just now we're becoming more open about it because we've kind of reached that point, I think, where we have to.
Yeah. And that's one thing I've been a little bit of kind of research I've been doing on kind of my end is like, okay, like where's the parallel in this? Um, because I don't think we're Britain Empire, right? Like that's
Yeah.
not us. And there's multiple reasons why we could say that is, right? Like, Britain population wise when I mean they had more people outside their empire or in the colonies and everything like that um than they had in their own country. America doesn't really have that, right? Like America's got a strong enough core to where, they can really kind of do a lot, whereas Britain, they had a kind of a weak core, and then once you kind of decimated that, then it's kind of like, everything else kind of falls, and then, you owe people favors because you don't have enough manpower to do things, right? And so I've been trying to think like, okay, like so like what are we then, right? How does this kind of empire go? Right? Because like you said, like I don't like when, Tucker calls like, oh, we're now we trans officially gone from the Republic to the Empire. And I'm like, you could make an argument that like that happened in like the 80s, with the
Yeah.
neocon kind of era. And and these things come in waves and everything like that. And that's when I'm like, I don't know if I'd go that far. I don't know if I'd go so far to say, hey, like we're now shifting from republic to an empire because I'm like, at the end of the day, like, we saw with the War Powers Act. I heard some people say maybe it's not with Venezuela, it's maybe with Nigeria or something like that, but it's like you have some people kind of pushing back against like this kind of idea of like how we use power and being more explicit through the empire. And so that's why I'm like, I don't know if we're really even kind of there. Um, and my big critique, and I know you share this as well, is I don't think we're smart enough to do an empire, right? Like, I don't think we're smart enough to be like, hey, we've got the elites and the political institutions to effectively do an empire, even if it's like a decentralized, like we pseudo run everything in the Americas. Like, that's kind of been my biggest critique is it's like, I don't think we have a plan and I don't think we have the capability or the desire really to do any of this. And it seems like it's kind of more of like elite minorities kind of guiding us to that direction. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I consider the start of the empire to be 1945, and
Yeah.
like I think Stephen Wortham has like a really good book out. I think it's what is it called? It's like Tomorrow of the World, and it's like the whole point of the book is basically how like U.S. elites came to the conclusion in like the 30s and 40s that they would reach for like global supremacy in the context of World War II.
Hmm.
It's like, you know, I mean, me and you have talked about this before too. Like, the United Nations is based in New York for a reason. The World Bank kind of originates from the 1944 conference in New Hampshire. What was? Remind me the name of that. We've talked about
Britain?
some. Yeah, Bretton Woods up in New Hampshire. So it's
Yeah.
like, I mean, all this like started from that. So like, it's the elite. Like elites have done that for a while, and the fact that it's becoming so like naked now, I think, is to the context of what you said. It's like the quality of elites we have now are just not the same. Like that,
Yeah.
it's pretty obvious, and I think that's kind of it's becoming more and more obvious with each passing generation. Like Tucker saying we're an empire now to me is pretty funny because Tucker was like around when
Oh
Iraq
yeah.
happened.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like like come on now.
Yeah. Well, and that's always been my biggest critique with him. It's like, he wants to act like, oh my gosh, I was so blinded. And I'm like, I kind of get that. Like, definitely different ways of thinking. But I'm like, I don't know. Like, I mean, it's kind of hard for me to trust him on some of that stuff. I think it's just more fashionable. Like he's kind of like, hey, like what's fashionable with kind of like the American people, which is a good thing, right? Like, hey, like, if American people are more nationalist and whatnot, like he's gonna swing that way more, as everyone was a little bit more neocon back in the early 2000s. So I kind of never liked, his analysis too much on that. Because it's like, yeah, it's kind of like lacking, it's kind of like, and it's also coming from the guy who was like helping do all this stuff. So it's like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, speaking of that point specifically for Tucker, like the last few years, especially, he's been kind of appealing to like a certain demographic more and more. Like he interviewed Fuentes a few weeks ago,
Hmm.
and then he interviewed what's his name, James Fishbank, the guy that's running for Florida governor. So I mean,
Yeah,
like
I just watched that.
he's definitely positioning himself for kind of with that kind of segment. So I mean, that's kind of part of the larger like inner right civil war, I guess you would say.
And kind of going back to what we were just talking about a little bit with the elites, I think that's why America can never really be an empire where it's like, I mean, at the end of the day, we have like elites, right, in America, and they're all primarily, wealthy individuals, right? Like that's kind of the key driver, right? This isn't some landed aristocracy or the House of Lords like in Britain and all this other kind of stuff when they had that. And whereas in the United States, it's like at the end of the day, like, we are still kind of a democracy in a way where, normal people can kind of get into those positions of power. Um, and it's like normal people don't want an empire, right? Like they'll be more willing to take risks, I think, like Trump did in Venezuela and maybe something like that in Cuba, but and maybe like a targeted strike in Iran. But it's like we're not putting boots on the ground. We're not gonna get super involved in certain stuff. Like we're not, Cuba might be the only one that I could see us actually doing anything with, just because it's how close it is. But it's like, as we talked about before, it's like China and Russia are already there. So it's like, we're not going to do anything. We're not going to put boots on the ground. So that's why I've just been like, like, that's why I've always struggled where it's like, we're in this empire stage where we're exerting probably more explicit power than we ever have, but we're not wanting to do it. You know what I mean? It's kind of like we're almost kind of doing it on the back foot instead of the forward position.
Well, I mean, like speaking with like the elites, like like the 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 ethnic groups that really kind of started this empire like 80 some years ago was mostly kind of WASP families from like New England, your Jewish
Hmm.
families in New York and stuff. And it's like you go look at them demographically, and they're just no longer here now. Like Trump is
Yeah.
really about kind of the last remnant of that kind of waspy kind of element. So
Yeah.
it's like, for one, you got that turnover, and then two, it's just like, I was thinking about this the other day with somebody. Like, since the early modern era, which started in like 1492, is for like that's usually what most people consider the modern period that started. Your typical empires last from about people say average of 250. I think 200 to 300 is kind of more accurate. And if you kind of think about it, like this year's America's 250th. So it's kind of like we are kind of. I think that is part of the problem too, where it's just becoming more blatant. It's just it has to like it's no longer something you can like all empires at some point start becoming unprofitable, where it becomes too much to like maintain a periphery or whatever.
Hmm.
And like you're seeing a lot of that play out. And then two, with it becoming more blatant, I have there's a person I follow and he made a really good point. He calls it geopolitical brain, where you're kind of in an imperial state of mind, so you keep getting yourself into these situations because you kind of justify it in your own head of like, oh, well, we need to do this or we need to do that, and then you find yourself in all these quagmires. The logic of empire eventually dictates itself.
Yeah.
And then too, kind of thinking about it, like, you made the point, like, okay, we didn't put boots on the ground. Well, okay, me and you were born in '97 too, right?
Hmm.
So like you're old enough to kind of remember Iraq just a little bit
Hmm.
and stuff. So it's like, 20 years ago we put in almost 300,000 guys in an invasion in Iraq, and now 20 years later, and that was across the other side of the world, and now we're doing like targeted airstrikes and special forces raids and stuff. It's like it's gotten smarter, but it's almost like it has to because we've kind of reached the point in Empire where like the diminishing returns make it to where we can't do our acts anymore. And
Yeah.
then, speaking of like the Empire in itself, like these never work out for their people in the long run. It'll get your elites really wealthy, but like it's very much, especially in the traditional empires. Like it was kind of known as, they'd privatize the profits and socialize the losses. Like, the UK tax money was the ones paying for like the British Army to rule India. I mean, while it's your elite class that's getting wealthy for like the trading and all that good stuff.
Yeah.
And it's like, we've talked about it. I know last year we talked about it extensively with um, how dollars, like dollar money, I guess more generally money systems work, is where it's like we've got the U.S. dollar is the international reserve currency, and then we've got U.S. Treasuries kind of underpinning that as the reserve asset, and that kind of leads, like we've talked about extensively. It creates a situation where you're incentivized to run deficits, you're incentivized to do all these stuff to maintain that, but then it hauls out your industrial base. And Britain's
Yeah.
all the same thing. Like this is nothing new. Spain, when it was an empire, it went from like one of the most developed places in Europe to by the 1600s that basically was behind everybody else. I mean,
Hmm.
like this is a very consistent theme, and it's the logic of empire.
Well, and one of the, I think I told you this. I read JFK's book, Why England Slept, and I'm no JFK fan or any of that kind of stuff, but I thought it was interesting because essentially his whole premise was like the whole reason why they slept was because they were more focused on economy and wanting to have and spend money on that because they were, like you said, like they were facing huge competition from who? The United States, Germany, places like Japan and other industrial countries to where it's like, hey, like, you got to decide, right? And if the United States is going to, go against China as, England was supposed to go against Nazi Germany, it's like, you have to have a strong economy. That way you can make the sacrifices on the military side. You're gonna have that. And it's like, it seems like we're kind of the opposite, right? Where it's like, if you want to have the economy, you kind of need to roll back the military. And it's kind of like, well, then you're not really kind of doing empire, right? You're
Yeah,
kind of doing the opposite of that. And I've just kind of been like that's what I'm trying to I'm trying to figure this out because I'm like, okay, like so what can we do right now? And basically it's, do you think, and this would be something I'd be curious about with you is, do you think that China is going to be the near peer adversary or whatever in the next 20, 30 years? Because it's like if you do, then it's like, okay, like then why are we acting like literally police with Venezuela where we're, surging resources, very targeted, very tactical, get what we want out of there, but we don't really have strategy. And it's like you can't really have both, right? If you're gonna do the empire, you need to shift away from the Venezuela and start going into the more conventional because that's what's going to put you up against China and actually make you competitive for them. Because if China's just throwing soldiers at them like they did in North Korea, or at us like they did in North Korea, and then we're over here acting like police officers and SWAT teams, we're gonna be mismatched. And I don't know how we kind of resolve that dichotomy.
I mean the answer is obvious, but the problem is you've just gotten don't like this is the logic of empire. You eventually get an elite class that's just so focused on that like it becomes structurally incentivized not to fix it
Hmm.
because it's I've told you about Luke Grauman. Like he has a really good point on this. It's like it's really amazing what people will believe when they're basically paid to believe it. It's
Hmm.
like our elite class benefits immensely from the system as it has existed, especially like the U.S. currency the way it is, and like that makes them wealthy. You know, pumps up stock prices, asset prices, whatever. But in order to fix that, you would really have to start making structural changes to that.
Yep.
And you know, like I think we talked about before. Like after World War II, one of the things the U.S. did was we kept interest rates on bonds. So basically anybody that was holding bonds at that time got wiped out due to inflation, but it set up the system to where it could exist, to where you saw like this massive prosperity in the 50s. It basically, and then like that was the height of U.S. industrial capacity and everything. But the problem is like you can't have both. You can't have this reserve asset currency. Everybody uses it because then you hollow out your industrial base because it makes exports non-competitive.
Yeah.
Or you can have that industrial base, and that's kind of the issue. It's like, and like a lot of people have made the point, like after the Soviet Union collapsed, it was all these people kind of believe like, oh, we'll never have another threat. Like the belief in the '90s was China will liberalize. It'll be, whatever. I mean, obviously it didn't turn out, and now look at us. Like, I think about it a lot. Like, it's been over 30 years since the Soviets collapsed. At this point, like you've had like almost two generations of elites that have just like so bought into this system that benefits them. I don't see it really changing.
Yeah. Well, and that's why I sent you that one article about the EU and South America because I'm like looking at this and I'm like, I mean, not exactly, but I'm like that's kind of what you have to have. Like the United States is not going to give up being the global financier of the world, right? Like that's just like a position I don't think they're going to give up, and hence, having that global reserve currency, which kind of enables one another. And it's like I don't see us getting rid of that. And so it's like so if you're not going to have that industrial base to make you competitive, then you have to either kind of do the nearshoring and all that other kind of stuff where it's like, hey, like, yeah, like it's not in China, but it's over in like Europe or it's over in Canada or it's over in Australia, New Zealand, whatever it is, or spread out. And then you can still kind of get a little bit there and you kind of spread it out and diversify it. And it's like we are doing so much contrary to that to actually like maintain what we need to maintain. Right, like if we're like trying to be competitive, we should be making deals with South America or Latin America and saying, hey, like we're gonna incentivize Chinese company or US companies that are in China to come here for a lot of their manual and low cost labor, right? Because like we would benefit from that, right? But it's like we're not trying to do that. We're not trying to strategically place that industrial base that we're never going to get back. We're not trying to place that somewhere where we can actually manage it. We're just still in this old thinking of like, well, wherever the market says it's going to go, it's going to go, you
Yeah,
know?
and there's the issue with that. Like when Japan was coming up big time back in like the '70s and stuff, especially in
Hmm.
the '80s and '90s, like you had a lot of people assuming we were going to fight a war with them eventually. Like there was a lot of like
Yeah.
a lot of the same stuff people say about China now they were saying about Japan back then. Japan was an ally, like by treaty, it was an ally.
Hmm.
So I think there is kind of like this underlying logic of like, okay, we want to, we want to, we want to have this industry outsourced, so this financial stuff. But then it's like, okay, but if you start putting all your industry in different places, that's going to make them stronger.
Yep.
And then it kind of, like it didn't work out for Japan for various reasons, but China's kind of been a different story. And it's like, I don't know. The thing I think about that is like, okay, say we moved it all to South America. What happens in 20, 30 years with Brazil or somebody like that?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it creates a situation where it's like you're constantly having to move it around and prevent any one person from, or any one country, I should say, kind of do it. But it's just like, and then I kind of sit there and I'm like, it'd make a lot more sense if we just went back to like the system as it was before the '70s.
Well, and I'm not completely opposed to that. I'm trying to be more realpolitik and saying like, hey, you're gonna have like politically that's gonna be hard to do, right? It's gonna be so hard to get the industrial base down. You can make the argument like semiconductors and others that like, hey, everyone's willing to jump on, right? Having some military industries and stuff like that here. Um, but that's why, and I sent you that article about kind of like, I think it was that one group's critique of Trump's like trade policies. And it's like, I was reading it, I was like, yeah, this is kind of like what we need to do is we need to sit there and say, hey, G7, like you guys are going to be the ones that are going to have to really kind of be our allies in this, right? Because then it's like we can compete with you guys, and like you said, like yeah, like we're worried about Japan when it's coming up, but it's like, we're not so worried about Japan, we're not so worried about EU, we're not so worried about Canada, we're not so worried about trying to remember who else is even in there. But it's like we're not worried about those countries, and I'm like, that's the only way you can do this. And exactly what you're saying, like, okay, well, then you get to Brazil, and it's like, well, what are you gonna do with Brazil or
Yeah.
Colombia, right? Colombia was not I mean, they were a big ally, what, 5, 10 years ago, and now Trump doesn't
Yeah.
like them, and it's like, so, like, well, what are we gonna do? And that's why, like, I think the part that's missing the most in the economic or in the American empire is, okay, so like, what domestic political reforms are you gonna put in to actually be able to manage at capacity this empire, a empire, or even if you want to have an empire. And I think that's the part that's lacking the most. Is I don't think we even have the domestic political capacity, just even like elections and stuff like that, to be able to manage this how we would like to.
Yeah. I mean, again, that's also kind of something common in empires. Like people forget before Rome became an empire, it had a series of civil wars and stuff.
Hmm.
This isn't nothing new. I mean, eventually that tension between, and funnily enough, the Roman stuff, it was mostly between like their upper elite and then the regular classes. So I mean, it's not again kind of that same kind of tension. And I just like especially with like China, the point you're making with that, like, did you see where he today, or I think it was yesterday, was like, yeah, I don't want Xi Jinping to go in there, but I mean, he's going to do what he wants. So it's like, okay, are we?
Yeah, it's like, well, that's kind of like the world you just created. You know what I mean? And it's like, like, and that's what baffles me so much is like, and when Tucker Carlson was talking to Piers Morgan about this, it kind of came up where it's like the British were very aware that they were running an empire, and they try to be a little bit more thoughtful about it than I feel like we are being thoughtful about it, right? They were very much like, hey, like if we do this, Germany's going to come in and try to encroach here, and we may have conflict with them, so like we're going to try to diffuse that early and try to, create spheres of influence, blah 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 blah. But it's like with Trump, it's like, no, like we're the only sphere, and if you don't like it, it's like tough.
And two, like the thing where like you're starting to see this where he's like really starting to shake down other countries. That's another
Yeah,
pretty classic sign of it's the periphery is getting too expensive to make, so you're having to start drawing on. I don't think core would be the right word, but it's like you're kind of hitting the next
closer.
level down
Yeah.
almost. Because now it's not like, okay, we're not bullying Iraq or not doing this. Now it's like, okay, we gotta go after Denmark or something.
Hmm.
So it's like you are starting to see kind of the diminishing returns. And two, there has we've talked about it too. There has been, I know, Colby up in DOD has kind of talked about like spheres of influence and stuff as a possibility.
Yeah.
And like I was reading Richard Overy's book on like the path to war in '39, and like one of the things he points out was like the British were like they weren't opposed to that. Like Chamberlain wanted to do like a kind of like a spheres of influence thing, and it just they couldn't budge on Poland is what
Yep.
it came down to. Like they just could not bring themselves to like accept some sort of compromise on that or something.
Well, I mean, that's how we are, right? Like I was
Yeah.
thinking about this the other day where I was like, okay, so first off, Trump kind of fucked us because it's like if we do spheres of influence, is Europe in our sphere or are they their own sphere, right? And then you kind of get into that, big dog, little dog, that kind of stuff. But it's like fundamentally, it's like, okay, like let's say the Middle East. You don't think China, Russia, or the United States are going to want to have spheres of influence there, right? Like, what about like Iraq or Saudi Arabia? It's like, are they in ours? Is the Middle East in our sphere? Is it country by country? Like, how do we look at that, right? And it's like there's always that one like country or region or wherever it is where it's like, yeah, I don't know how we're going to resolve this. And I feel like the Middle East might kind of be that.
Well, you're starting to see a lot of signs of that too. Where like I don't know how much I believe him on it, but he came out and said it. BB's like I want to be off US aid in like 10 years.
Yep.
So I mean they're kind of positioning themselves for what comes next. And then today you've seen all these. Me and you've been talking about like the last several weeks, and especially like the last like I would say this week it just really kind of became like a mainstream thing. Like you're starting to see this Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Egypt kind of thing form.
Yep.
I mean, that's basically the Ottoman Empire coming back,
Hmm.
and it's kind of it's they defeated the UAE and Israel and Yemen, and now they're really starting to make plays in Sudan. So I mean, like you really are starting to see these. I mean, like yeah, I think that's part of the reason Bibi wants to be kind of off the USA is because he kind of sees that coming. He's got to make an accord with that bloc or something.
Well, I
So it's
think that's
like,
been a long time coming. I mean, there's
oh
a
yeah,
reason why, Israel's had a huge economic resurgence for the past 30 years. You
everybody else was
know,
destroyed.
well, yeah, I mean, well, you're killing everyone else, but it's like
Yeah,
there's a reason why Nvidia is over in Israel, right?
yeah.
There's a reason why a lot of these American companies are over there.
And
Um,
to Israel, up until really the last few years, they love playing the middleman between like us, the Russians, and the
mhm,
Chinese. Like that's as far back as like the '90s, there was reports they would get stuff from us and then sell it to the Chinese or whatever.
yeah.
So I mean, they
Well,
have
that's
those.
why we always had the adversarial relationship with Mossad. Is it's like, yeah, they were great, but they're also like not really great.
Yeah,
I think
screw
there's
us
a
over.
saying where it's like there's a reason why Benjamin Netanyahu's not allowed in the CIA building, or he's Mossad or something like that.
Yeah.
You know,
Well, I mean, there's been a lot of insider books come out where like the CIA absolutely hates them because they just come in and like because the Israel lobby, there's not a whole lot they can do about them.
yeah.
But and then just I think about it too, like especially in the context of, like immigration and stuff, since we kind of got on the subject to like domestic policy and stuff. That's a very very classic sign of empire. Like by the time the Roman Empire reached its peak in like say like around like the first century or
Yeah.
whatever, like the Italian peninsula was like 60% like Middle Eastern.
Yeah.
They basically had their own version of like the same demographic stuff we have going on. And then
But
uh,
see, so let me because we've got 2 minutes.
okay,
Let me just kind of like say one thing to that. That's the reason why, like, when people say, "Oh, just look at the Roman Empire," and I'm not saying you're making that, but you hear people, all these doomers say that, and it's like just like the British Empire. I'm like, there's reasons why I think we are built differently, and that's why I'm like, I don't like history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes, right? And so I'm like, so how's that gonna rhyme? Okay, because I don't think the demographic change for America is gonna be as big of a problem as it was with the British, with some of these other countries. But I'm like, first off, I don't know. But I'm like, but there's probably something else out there, like the elites or the whatever, where it's like there's something in there that we're missing. And I don't know where, like, it's gonna be bits and pieces from all these empires. And that's why I'm like, what empire out there am I missing? Like I'm looking at the British, I'm looking at the Romans. Do I need to start looking at the Mongols, and how they kind of ran stuff? Like, I don't know. And so just to kind of wrap it up here, and sorry to kind of go on a longer tangent on this end, but my perspective, and then I quickly kind of like to hear your perspective in about a minute. I think the Democrats need to, or the liberals need to start putting out a vision that I think you can get people behind, um, as a contrary to the empire. And finish this off here, real quick.
as far like in my personal opinion, from like a right wing perspective, like we just need to give up empire. It's just not working for us.
Well,
It,
that could probably be it. That'd be the
I
populist.
mean, yeah, and whether that's realistic or not, it's kind of a separate thing
Yep.
in terms of like my opinion. But the empire that like I look towards the most, and which I always encourage people to look into the Soviets. The
Yep.
Soviets were there's a lot of interesting parallels in my opinion there. But yeah.
All right, sweet. Let's end it here.